بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. We're continuing our lessons on the fiqh of food and drink. Last week we ended our discussion about the permissibility of vinegars and the ruling on different types of vinegar. So for those of us who were not here, or just to summarize, we spoke about vinegar being permissible, all types of vinegar in origin. And then we specified different types of vinegar that are available on the market, like balsamic vinegar, and we said that this is also permissible. Then we mentioned the issue of wine vinegar, red and white wine vinegar, and we said that the conclusion is, if it's produced, and it's important to understand, the scholars, they differed about the permissibility of red and white wine vinegar, and the correct opinion, we said it is permissible, inshallah, if it's produced by one of two parties. Number one, a group of non-Muslims, or any group, for example, non-Muslims, we'll take the example, who believe it's permissible in their tradition or their faith. Jews or Christians, for example. If they produce it, then it's permissible for us to consume it, because we did not produce it ourselves. And number two, some of the fuqaha, some madhabs amongst our tradition, they permitted the use of wine to be made into vinegar. So from there, the scholar said, if the Muslim who holds the view that it's permissible makes it, and you hold the view that it's not allowed to make it, you can still consume it. And if it comes from those who made it, like non-Muslims, and you go to the store and buy it, it's still permissible. And he said this is the view of Umar bin Khattab, radiallahu ta'ala anhum, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, and Shaykh Sulaymaan Ruhaili. And so the benefit we take is that the clarity I want to make here is that when we're talking about red and white wine vinegar, we're talking about the ones in the store, you can buy it. Not just the food that's placed in it. Like for example, if you buy salad dressing that has red or white vinegar, this is different. That's permissible. We're talking about you buying the stuff as well. It is permissible according to the more correct opinion. And a reminder, how are these vinegars made anyways? Right? So vinegar is made, we said it's a process of fermentation of any source material. Could be apples, apple cider vinegar, grains for white vinegar, etc. So you take your source, you ferment it, right? This source, you ferment it until it becomes close to becoming alcohol. It's a key difference. You don't let it become alcohol. Before it becomes alcohol, you put in some bacteria, you put in oxygen, you give it air, and then it goes into vinegar. So just to make clear, because I think last week we didn't clarify the method of production. So you don't make the khamar, you don't make intoxicants and then vinegar. Rather, before it becomes, you do those actions. So that's why it becomes vinegar. Today's time, one more benefit connected to this. Even balsamic vinegar, the real stuff is very expensive. Right? So it is fermented for many years. And so the authentic stuff we don't consume because it's too expensive, most of us. The everyday brand you get at the store, it's important to know many of the regular balsamic vinegars include wine vinegar. Why? Because it takes too long to make a good quality balsamic vinegar. So to speed it up, they put red wine vinegar in there. So that's just for your own knowledge, even if you should know that beforehand, that that's how they do it. But since red wine and white wine vinegar, inshallah, is also permissible, there's no problem there. I'm saying that because some people, they realize, how can the balsamic vinegar, one of them is very expensive, another one is just very cheap. That's why it's cheaper, because to make it faster, they have to put something else. Okay, inshallah, we didn't speak about the last vinegar, which is the rice vinegar, and then from there we'll move on to miscellaneous issues, just different products, one by one, as much as the time permits. So what last vinegar we didn't speak about is rice vinegar. Rice vinegar, or rice wine vinegar they call it, is different than rice wine. So there's two things in the market, or three, but really there are two. Rice wine vinegar, also called rice vinegar. Well, it's quite similar. Sometimes they call rice wine vinegar because it's like red and white wine. Or rice vinegar. They're very similar, even though at the end you make a vinegar. And there's rice wine. So it's wine from rice. This one is different than the last one. Rice wine is what the Japanese, they use a lot for drinking sake or marine. for drinking, and obviously sometimes in cooking. In fact, it depends on where you're buying your food. So the rice wine vinegar or rice vinegar is permissible because of the same principle we mentioned earlier. At the time of the Rasulullah there was no rice wine. It was not common for them to make rice from wine. And the proof for that is Hadith Sahih Bukhari, where it mentions when Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrated what khamr is, Hadith number 5588, Sahih Bukhari, 5588. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu listed all the different types of alcohol, ways alcohol was made known to the Sahaba and the Arab. And then he said, وَالْخَمْرُ مَا خَامَرَ عَقْلٍ. Khamr is that which clouds the mind. Intoxicant is that which clouds the mind. At the end of the narration, the narrator said, يَا أَبَا عَمَرْ فَشَيْءٌ يُسْنَعُ بِالسِّنْدِ مِنَ الرُّزِّ. He said, what about some kind of wine made from rice? He said, ذَلِكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ عَلَى عَهْدِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said, that wasn't known at the time of Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. Hafid Hajar explains means they didn't have rice wine and known to the Sahaba. But we know in the Eastern tradition, this is their main use. So rice wine is like all wine, haram. Rice wine vinegar or rice vinegar, فَهُوَ halal. And why is it important to know this? For those of us who like sushi, then you need to know this. Because when it comes to making sushi now, this is a problem. When you're making sushi, there's two types of possible rice wine or rice vinegar might be used in the production or the preparation of the sushi rice. Now, if you call these different stores, everyone is different. And if you look online, you'll see the way that it's made generally, for everyday folks, you use rice wine vinegar because it's cheaper. And I recently called actually one particular sushi place to ask them particularly, and they say we use rice vinegar. But that isn't proof for all across the board. For example, if you go to more expensive sushi places, you don't know, maybe marine, maybe rice wine, maybe sake, right? They might use this because it's more expensive and it has a bitter taste. So the important is that if it's using rice wine vinegar or rice vinegar in the sushi, inshallah there's no harm. But if you're using rice wine, then the question now is that wine remaining in the taste or does it get cooked out? Truth be told, it's supposed to cook itself out. That's what it's supposed to do. But obviously we know it also has flavor. So my advice to those who like to eat sushi, just to wherever you get your sushi, ask that question. Is it rice vinegar in the sushi or not? Or it means the rice, and they'll let you know. And perhaps they can substitute for you even, if you're a paying customer, inshallah. And hopefully that could solve the issue for you. And we're not making tahreem ma halallah. We're not making haram Allah bin halal, but this is something you have to take into consideration because this is what's available. Alright, so I would encourage you, whoever, to check where you're getting it from, just to make sure. But if you check online, for the most part, what I've noticed, rice vinegar is used. Wallahu a'la wa a'lam. Okay, so that's enough about the vinegars. We move now to miscellaneous issues. So we'll just mention one by one as many different topics, ingredients as we can, that are not connected to meat or alcohols or drinks. Because we covered, alhamdulillah, a lot of those. And we're just trying to wrap up the different ones that we didn't mention. So we'll begin first when the ruling on nutmeg. Nutmeg is something many of us we heard about. And on Toronto Da'wah, alhamdulillah, there's a long article the brothers have put there about the ruling on nutmeg. The problem is nutmeg, for those who are aware, is a type of narcotic. In that if you take a certain amount, it can create hallucinogenic effects. Obviously, you have to take quite a lot of it. Alright, not the standard usage. And obviously, this is truth be told, used as a necessity. No one really gets high off a nutmeg. No sane person would use it unless they're desperate. And so often they find the people who are cannabis addicts, when they can't find it, hatta in the Muslim world, they go for the nutmeg. One of the shuyukh, he was mentioning that he bought some good amount of nutmeg, and the other guy said only people who are trying to get high buy that much. And he said those who couldn't find the cannabis too. Subhanallah azim. So what's the hukum on that? If you go to the articles there, all the ruling. But the ulama, they say in conclusion, qawl al-sahih, it's permissible, nutmeg to use in small amounts. That's the final word. Small amounts, again, some scholars say don't use any of it. Why? Because it still has the capacity for hallucination, or a type of numbing or of the senses and the intellect. And you can find it on our site, the scholars who still caution against it. But scholars who did rule it permissible in small amounts for flavoring and aromatics. For flavoring, what's their argument? So, because you have to understand the argument in order to understand how they reach that conclusion. So here, to summarize, because it's going to be connected to the next topic, there are three types of substances the ulama they categorize. Three types. If you learn this, it'll save you a lot of time. First, we have something called a muskir, an intoxicant. And we've spoken about this in the class. Something that makes you high is called a muskir. Muskir is literally an intoxicant. So what is intoxication? The technical definition, according to the scholars, that which causes the loss of the senses, so you lose your senses, so your mind, alongside pleasure and euphoria. So intoxication is when you lose your mental capacity and faculties, but you feel a certain euphoria and happiness. That's intoxication. And the key words are those two, pleasure and euphoria. That's the muskir, that's an intoxicant. So when people say high, this is what they mean. When someone said they got high, this is what they're talking about. So those we know are haram. وَمَا أَسْكَرَ كَثِيرُ فَقَلِيلُ حَرَامٌ. The hadith is clear. Whatever intoxicates a large amount, small amount is haram. So intoxicants we already spoke about. That's called muskir. Second category, mufattir. Mufattir or mukhaddir. These are narcotics. Narcotics are not the same as the intoxicant. Why? The ulama they say the mufattir and mukhaddir, what it does, it numbs your senses. But it doesn't give you the euphoria that you're anticipating from getting high. You're not going to feel that happiness, but you feel numbness or mellowness. So some say it's more like a sedative effect. It brings you down. And why is the difference there? Because the hadith we just cited earlier prohibits intoxicants, not mufattirat, even though we mentioned last week hadith Salama, when Nabi ﷺ prohibited all intoxicants and narcotics. So we're not saying that just because it's not an intoxicant, narcotics are halal. I'm saying narcotics is a special ruling, not like intoxicants. Just remember, mufattir or mukhaddir, that which numbs the senses but does not create the euphoria or the high. That's number two. Some scholars add one more called a mufsid. Like Imam Gharafi specifically added a third one called a mufsid. He said it's something which it clouds your mind. So it's close to muskir, but it's not. It means it clouds your mind, but doesn't have euphoria, and it doesn't bring you down. So he put it like in between. But many scholars, they don't mention that third category. He's called this mufsid, a mufsid. Something which clouds your mind, doesn't cause euphoria, but also doesn't numb you. So just like something that's probably in between both categories. But truth be told, just the two categories, if you remember them, is enough. So we said muskir, mufattir, or / mukhaddir. What's the point of all this? We know intoxicants are haram, small and large, period. What about mufattir? Mufattirat, what is it halal to take a small amount? Can I apply the last hadith to this hadith? Can I say, مَا أَسْكَرَ كَثِيرُهُ فَقِلُّ haram applies to this one? No. And that's why the scholars permitted it. They say if something is categorized as a narcotic, it does not take full scope of the ruling of a intoxicant. Now you understand? The ulama, when they say now, go back to the nutmeg. Nutmeg is not an intoxicant. It's a narcotic. And the reasons people who take it, they don't get high. They become numbed. And if they take too much of it, they start hallucinating. So great scholars like Imam Azim Abadi, and again, if you go on Quran Da'wah and you put nutmeg, you'll find all the quotes. They said, and others, that nutmeg is not an intoxicant. Earlier scholars were mistaken for calling it an intoxicant. It's actually a narcotic. And this is after research. People investigated. So, if nutmeg is more of a narcotic, or is a narcotic, not an intoxicant, can I take a small amount that doesn't harm me? The answer is yes, because there's no hadith that says narcotics in small amounts is haram. Is it making sense? This is very important to differentiate. This is why the ulama, when they examined it, they looked carefully. And the truth be told, most of the Muslim world, in fact even Western world, nutmeg is used as a very common spice in our food and drink. In fact, you go to any coffee shop, you can put nutmeg in your drink, or you buy baked goods, or you bake at home. And that's what some scholars said, that it's so common in the Muslim world and in non-Muslim world. It's very hard to believe that everyone is indulging in an intoxicant without really knowing. Because you're not taking that large amount, you're taking it very small. So what's the final word? Majma' Fiqh al-Islami, the Islamic Fiqh Council, we've quoted it many times. They say in the Majalla, Majma' Fiqh Islami, volume 8, page 1388. Majalla Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami. This is a big council. This is the Islamic Fiqh Council or Academy, world top scholars all across the world gathered, and they researched this. Conclusion, volume 8, page 1388. It is permissible to use saffron, ambergris, and nutmeg in small amounts to improve the taste of food. The conclusion, saffron, that's my next topic, nutmeg, and amber, I think it's called ambergris, ambergris, I can't pronounce it wrong, was all permissible in small amounts to improve the taste of food, because you use it for flavoring. So you're allowed to use what you buy at the shops, or what you buy, most of our families and mothers, they put in cooking. But buying large amounts to get high from it, or it's not high, to get intoxicated or close to, or numbing, haram. Alright, so that's clear. But the difference is that narcotics are allowed for medicinal or any benefit in small amounts. That's the point. So very important. That's why now when you go to the emergency room, they give you anesthetics, a sedative. Why is it allowed? Why is that allowed and not other thing? Because it's a narcotic. It's going to help you to alleviate the pain, and it's necessary. What if there's no need for it? You shouldn't use it. And that's what the ulama have made very clear. In the Muslim world, just indulging in narcotics is haram and deserving of punishment. So someone just using it for no reason is not allowed. So inshallah, there's no harm in the nutmeg. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Next one is saffron. And some people will be surprised. Saffron too? Yes, saffron too has the same effect. Some people tried it apparently, because if we have this solution that this actually people are getting the mind-altering capacity. But saffron is the same issue. And someone will say, how can saffron be haram? We'll say, well, some of our scholars, some of them, they classify saffron mistakenly as also intoxicant. Because they found that people were using it and they were getting close to this kind of intoxication. But let's be honest, truth be told, it's not. It's a narcotic. So therefore, is it allowed to take a small amount? Yes. When you cook at home, when you make your rice, is it haram to use it? No. Alhamdulillah, because everyone's using it, right? So it's very hard to believe people are just widely using an intoxicant. So the scholars say it's the same point. And the reason why, if you go on Turan Da'wah, there's another post underneath Nutmeg, there's a point about that. Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, rahimahullah, he classified it as an intoxicant. But other scholars challenged him on that ruling. They said, no, it's not. It's a mufattir and mukhaddir. It's not a muskir. And the reason why he argued that is that, again, in his knowledge and from his teachers and understanding, this is what he concluded. So scholars who make that judgment, they make ijtihad and they're rewarded for their effort. But the scholars who examine it again, they come to the conclusion that, you know what, it's not the case. Therefore, I just read earlier, Majma' Fiqh al-Islami said it's permissible to use saffron for taste or improving the taste of food and small amounts, and there's no problem whatsoever in buying it, using it in those small proportions. So using large amounts to do something is not correct, right? And inshallah, it becomes clear to everybody about that. Again, if you go to Turan Da'wah, you type in these, you'll find all the quotations if you want to see which scholars said what about it. And it's important, our ulama, they spend time on this, researching this to make things clear for us, right? Because again, we have to give appreciation to the scholars researching these issues to make clear and to make easy the affairs for the Muslims, right? They're not looking to make haram, wala min halal, but also to make sure that we understand why it's permissible. Because now if you go and someone tells you, oh, I heard saffron is wrong or haram, you can explain why it's not. Because this is important to know the background behind it. Okay, with that being said, so those are the spices. And then obviously there's probably other spices we didn't talk about, but we will not mention them for now. We'll move on to another topic, which is to do with instant noodles. Right? So this is maybe random topic, but it's connected to this. What's the ruling on instant noodles, or what they call in the Muslim, or we see in many Muslim countries, Maggi or Maggi, that company, or Indomie, right? They call it. What's the hukum? What's the ruling on instant noodles? And interestingly, right, we know instant noodles have two types, vegetable-based and then the meat one, chicken or beef, etc. So when it comes to the vegetable instant noodles, then they're clearly halal, there's no issue there, because you have noodles and you have some spices, which have some remnants or some traces of vegetables, so there's nothing wrong there. But what about the beef and chicken flavored ones? Because now someone would say that it has to say halal on it, or it has to say, it doesn't say halal on it, we don't know if it's halal. So interestingly, our scholars actually talked about this ruling. The Permanent Committee in Saudi Arabia, Lajnatu Da'ima, they were asked a question about Maggi, right? This company specifically, the Indian-based company, because it's popular in the Muslim world. I think here in Canada, our Mr. Noodles is the leader, right? It's a Canadian-made one. So here they say the Maggi soup is imported from Europe, for this country, and the doubts are raised that it contains pork or lard. It is thus halal. Is it thus halal for us to eat it, or haram, or should we avoid it? Provide us with a beneficial answer, may Allah reward you. So the Permanent Committee of Saudi Arabia, right, so this is the highest scholarly level, scholarly council, they said that the permissibility is the origin regarding or ruling unless there's proof to the contrary. So we mention this principle again and again. Al-asl fil al-At'amah, the origin for all food and drink is hil, permissibility. Then they say only if it's ascertained or most probable that the soup in which is mixed with an amount of pork or lard, then it becomes haram. You have to be certain. So the first thing is that we can't be certain, because if anyone reads the packaging, it says artificial chicken flavor or artificial beef flavor. And the more you research, the more it becomes unclear. Because really and truly, there is no chicken or beef, or rarely, because we have to be fair, some brands actually have some started with chicken and beef and it became something. But for the most part, it's simulated flavor. And many Muslims may not be familiar with it. Most of the artificial flavoring, what's artificial flavoring anyways? It doesn't mean you start off with the raw ingredient. You start in the lab and you simulate, or you start off with the original and you tamper it to this point that it doesn't become original. So many of times, for a lot of the flavors you find in chips, or in this case noodles, they're not even chicken and beef. They have nothing to do with it. The furthest from it. And that's why many of the noodles are vegan. Right? That's probably the biggest irony. Right? The chicken, beef, noodles are vegan. Some of them actually are. I believe if you research, like Maggi, I checked the website. Besides the chicken one, everything else is vegan. And sometimes you can't tell. Like Mr. Noodles is the most difficult to find out what's in it. Like we know what's in it, but we have no idea. There's no website or anything to research what the source is. It's made in Canada, but there's no tracing of it. So the question now, what if I go and I buy, I have no idea. It doesn't say vegan, no one double checked it. Then the scholars have two opinions. One opinion, Permanent Committee, another fatwa from them. Again, this time the Shaykh Ibn Baz rahimahullah was the head of it. He said, him and the legend, when they asked the same question, another question about the Maggi soup or the instant noodles, that the soup takes the same ruling as its source regarding lawfulness or prohibition. In other words, if the source is known to be lawful, the soup is lawful. If its source is not known, it will still be lawful. See the point? If you don't know, it's still lawful, they said. And so if a Muslim does not know whether the soup is mixed with unlawful fats, it will be lawful because the basic ruling of such things is lawfulness, and it cannot be altered unless there's evidence. So if you don't know, it's still halal. Imagine, we're talking about the chicken and the beef one. We don't know the origin, still halal because of the general ruling. It could be from the halal slaughtered meat of the people of the book or not. So that's the Permanent Committee. You can find it on English, alifta.gov.sa. You can find it online, their fatwa there. So the Shaykh Ibn Baz rahimahullah said, if we don't know the origin, it's still permissible. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin has a slightly different view. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah actually was asked about this, and he concluded that he dislikes this soup, or not that I was eating it, but the ruling is the makruh. He says, why? Because we don't know who sourced it, the meat, who made it. And again, if it's actually made from meat, that's the point. We don't know even if it's made from it. But his conclusion is, if it comes from halal, slaughtered, Islamically slaughtered meat, halal. If it's from the people of the book, that's his view. If it comes from a land where people are majority Jew and Christian, then it's halal. Otherwise, it's better to avoid, or haram. That's Shaykh Uthaymin's view, and this can be found in Nur ala Darb, page 67, side B. So his conclusion is, if it's from Muslim lands or halal meat slaughtered, it's halal. We're talking chicken and beef one. If it comes from the people of the book, Countries where people are, majority of people in the book, then it's halal. If it's otherwise, it's haram. Why is that helpful? His point here, the Shaykh's fatwa here, because where does most of the instant noodles come from? Which country? Well, Indonesia is Indomie, yeah. Or Japan and Korea and over there, and they're not Ahl Kitab by any far stretch of the imagination. So the mushkil is if you're getting instant noodles from them, then there's two final views there. Are they Ahl Kitab? No. Majority of the numbers there, they're not. Buddhist or Shinto or otherwise. So that's one issue. And the second issue then will be then, if we know. If we don't know, you can say, okay, the primitive community say we don't know, but the Shaykh mentioned a good point. We can't even say that it's from Ahl Kitab even. So if it's coming from places where you could source it, or again, just you can stick with the vegetable if you want. But for us, our purposes, because we're in Canada, Mr. Noodles from Canada, so inshallah we believe it's come from this source. So if someone ate the beef and chicken there's an argument for it. If you avoided it, better. In fact, as like I said, Indonesian, the Indomie is halal, clearly from the Muslim country, that's better. And that's the safest. Just get the halal one. Why even stress yourself, especially when there's alternatives? And the reason I'm saying that is because some people, right, they make haram, which is halal, but then you can see there's not such a black and white to make haram. But if someone said, why even go there? That's a good point, because alhamdulillah, there's alternative. And there are clearly halal instant noodles, right? I mean, it's not even difficult, right? So we're just mentioning so you can know all the facts. Okay, that's enough about the noodles now. We'll move to the next one, inshallah. Ruling on mushrooms. And when I say mushrooms, I'm talking about the regular mushrooms, not the drugs. So mushrooms, we know, it's generally a vegetable. So the hukum, the ruling on it, revolves around anything else that comes out the ground. فهو halal, aslan. Whatever comes out the earth, Allah made halal for us, halal and tayyibah. Halal, and it's something which is, we should also know it's wholesome. But the problem now is that how are mushrooms grown? How are they obtained? And so the question then is that we know mushrooms, for the most part, they're fungi. So they may grow from impurities at times. So the question is it permissible to eat mushrooms that are grown from either wild mushrooms or a mushroom or any vegetable that's grown on impurities? So we're not going just in the mushroom, we back up and we look at the ruling. Where is it coming from? So for example, you have a tree, or you have, I don't know, let's say a dirty creek, and on the side there's growing mushrooms, and there's clear, some type of najasa is there or something, and something is growing. Can I eat that which is growing on top of it? So the scholars, they say, and this is the jumhur, the majority of the four madhabs, so the Hanafiya, the Maliki, and the Shafi'iyya, and some of the Hanbalis, that it's permissible to eat vegetables or grains that are grown or have been irrigated with impure sources of water or impurities. So for example, the mushroom grew on manure or water which is najis, and it transformed or right into a mushroom, it's halal to eat it, or any other goods. And the reason why they talked about it in the first place is that we know impurities are haram. But what happens when you go from impurity to something pure? Because mushroom is not impure. So the argument is permissible. The argument, where did they get this from? They argue that this is the practice of istihala. Clear example of istihala, of chemical change. So you have somebody finds a mushroom growing on some kind of najis or impurity or possible impurity, irrigated by what looks like dirty water, and it transformed into something pure. The ruling is again based on the final product, not the origin. And they use as an example to show this, like Ibn Qudam al-Mughni, the fact that we drink milk from cows. Where does the cow milk come from? Anyone knows biology? Where does our milk come from? What does Allah tell us in the Quran again? Milk is between what? Yes, between the them, blood, and feces. It means Allah says, from the udder of the cow, we know there's blood in the cow. We know the cow also has feces, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala produces pure milk, laban and khalisa. So obviously, milk is blood transformed into this pure substance. And of course, we know the cow has 4 stomachs, other things are in there. But Allah says, from a miracle of Allah, from a cow that has blood in it and feces, then you have pure milk. Can someone say, oh, astaghfirullah, it came from the blood, or it came from something else in the cow? No, فهو halal, istihala واضح. Very clear example of chemical change. And the fact that we don't even think about that is the fact that When we look at milk, we look at whether it's a final product. We don't judge. We mentioned this in lessons earlier. Right? So this is a clear example. So, conclusion is, if you have mushrooms or you have any fruit or vegetable that's grown out of impurity, inshallah, it is permissible. How about another example connected to this? Farmers, when they farm, right, they put manure into their fertilizer, right? And they fertilize their farms with manure, right? And then from there grow some good vegetables. Is that halal? Same issue. Right? First of all, can you put manure into your yard to grow vegetables? I mean, it's good for it, right? We know this. But then someone says najis. Taking najis and putting it there. No, it's going to transform. And that's why Imam Bayhaqi in his Sunan, he actually has a narration. Sa'ad ibn Waqqas radiallahu ta'ala used to fertilize his land with feces. So that's a benefit. And the Sahaba, they look at the understanding Sahaba they had. They understood no problem there. Because some people will think, oh, you can't, you got to get a, I don't know, halal fertilizer or something. I don't know what that would mean. But the point is, like, you become very complicating it. You put it in, it's going to come something else. Don't worry about that. And they understood that. And Bayhaqi has a chapter, putting dung and feces in the land. Chapter, putting dung and feces in the land. And the reason why I'm saying this, you have to have this kind of insight. Sahaba, mashallah, their deen, to understand deen was deep, amiq. It's not superficial, very deep understanding. Because some people, again, will call the question. So the conclusion is, mushrooms on your pizza, otherwise, فَهُوَ halal, inshallah. There's no ishkal, inshallah ta'ala. And anyone who tries to investigate the back origins is going into something confusing and not clear and not Islamic. Inshallah, just a few more things we'll mention for ending. Next comes another issue, was connected to cat food. I mean, it's not human food, but cat food. And I found this recently, and I found it interesting, so I said we might as well discuss it. What's the issue of cat food for those people who have cats? Right? Because some will say, subhanallah azim, you know, I found one fatwa, someone mentioned that cat food is haram to buy. And the argument was that cat food, what's in it? Because we know cats, they eat meat and fish. And a lot of the things that in it could be meat. Just dead meat. Because the way they produce cat food, unless you're paying premium dollar for good quality cat food, most cat food is the offal and the scraps after your slaughtered meat put together and put into the bag and a few other things, and they give that to the cat. So the mushkila, they said that it's actually dead meat. So you're buying dead meat and you're giving it to the cat. What's the hukm on that? It's actually interesting, right? Obviously, we're not talking about cats here, because haram to eat cat, just for a side point. Haram to eat the cat, I'm just saying that. But the cat food we're talking about. So the mushkil is, when I read it, I was okay, we might as well go find some more research on it. So the issue now is that the cat meat, cat food itself, is it true that it's mostly dead meat? And the answer is not necessarily. It actually is slaughtered meat, mixed with other types of scraps and vegetables, and they put, or not vegetables, but other things, and they put it together like that. So it's a mixture. So therefore, it's not haram clearly. And if you source it, you'll find, depending on what brand you buy, because the fatwa I was reading there was suggesting you make your own cat food, right, which is very difficult. But the idea is that cat food is meat. To rule that it's meita, dead meat, is not clear, because the packaging that you buy tells you it's actually chicken and beef, or whatever, fish, whatever it is. And there's some qawa'id now you have to know. First principle, Imam al-Nawawi writes in Kitab al-Majmu' وَيُجُوزِ إِطْعَامُ الْمَيْتَ لِكِلَابِ الطُّيُورِ وَإِطْعَامُ الْطَعَامِ الْمُتَنَجِّسَ لِلدَّوَابِ. Imam al-Nawawi says it's permissible to feed dogs and birds dead meat. And it's permissible to feed animals from impurities. It's important to know that. Cats are not humans. They eat this stuff, so you can give it to them. The mushkil is, can I buy it? Because if you know the hadith in Abu Dawud and others, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam prohibited the sale and the transaction of idols, khamar, meita, dead meat, and khinzir. All that is haram. Whatever is haram to consume, it's haram, thamanuhu, its price. You know, for some of us, we're probably wondering, is there a cat fiqh? There is some cat fiqh, yes, there is some fiqh related to cats, there is. But the point is, what do you do with this then? If it's halal to feed them, no problem. But now, can I go and buy it? See where the mawdu' now, where the ishkal is, can I go buy it? Question is it really dead meat? No, it's not necessarily. That's the first problem. We're making a judgment. What if it's 70-30? 70% real meat and some other things. Then some scholars say at the end of the day, this is from the tawabi', that which follows the hukum. A tabi'u tabi'. There's a ruling that says that something which follows something else, it takes its ruling. So if majority is halal and something haram, for this case, let's say 70% of the cat meat is actually meat, and some other stuff is the offal they get from the scraps, which could be dead meat, the majority takes the precedence and the other one follows. But if it's purely dead meat, then of course you're not going to buy it, and you wouldn't want to feed your cat with that anyway. So you want to try to get something better. So the issue is we really don't have proof to say that it's all like this. And scholars, some of them mentioned Allah has forgiven us small amounts of things that are impure or wrong if it's in the majority of halal. Just like we mentioned before, small amounts of impurity are forgiven if it's the same thing. So here, inshallah, there is no ishkal, wallahu a'lam. And Ibn Taymiyyah, others mentioned as well that it's permissible to feed the animals impurities and dead meat and stuff like this. So if it's permissible to feed them and we're not buying it, we're buying meat, inshallah, it's fine. Right? So this is just I found this interesting, so I just said maybe I will mention to the brothers, even though it has nothing to do with our own food. Another question that comes up, right, we add to this, is the issue of yeast. Is yeast permissible? Scholars say yes, it's permissible to buy and use yeast. Because yeast, we know it can be used for other usage, for fermentation of impermissible things like intoxicants, or to leave in your bread or to rise your bread. So the scholars say there's no prohibition regarding yeast because your use, number one, is to rise the bread, nothing else, and you're using small amounts. Recently on the market there's another type of yeast that's popular, brewer's yeast. And this yeast you use specifically for craft beer. So some people said this kind of has medicinal benefits, but its origin is like the grains you get after you, I think if I understood it correctly, after some kind of fermenting is done for beer, it's a remains used, something like this. So even then the scholar says it's still yeast, it's still permissible to use for the halal purpose and we shouldn't doubt it. There's no need to go there. Because remember, yeast is only used to rise the bread, you're not using it to do anything else. So inshallah there is no problem with yeast and we shouldn't have doubt regarding it. Another thing that comes is to do with things which are halal but can be harmful. And we'll mention one example. We mentioned this before in Qawa'id Fiqhiyya, in the Fiqh Maxim lesson. What's the ruling on soft drinks, energy drinks, and those kind of things, which in origin are permissible but have possible harm for the body? Means soda, one can itself is not harmful to your overall health unless you are particularly have a health medical issue why you shouldn't be taking it. But let's say there is someone, a regular healthy person, one can of soda is not going to kill them. Is it halal to drink that? What about if it potentially has harm? Means you drink 12 cases, you can harm your health. So here the scholars, they look at these issues. These are not to do with intoxication, do with madarra, harm. It has to do with the harm. And we mentioned in the beginning, the first lessons of this class, one of the things that makes something haram is harm. Can be dar, can be harmful. So some people will take that logic and some people have told you it's haram to drink soda because it's harmful. And so the question, that's not a good ruling. That's not a correct understanding. And none of our ulama, as far as I know, any alim who made tahrim. Right? Also, you should know, some people have a conspiracy. They believe that, I don't know what they believe, but they believe this is some kind of, some other things are in there. Right? It was a rumor, I think, in probably the early 90s and late 2000s that there's some kind of pork in Pepsi. No, whatsoever. Scholars say, where are people getting this? Right? There's no proof whatsoever for that. Likewise, there's no harm in caffeine. Caffeine is halal, there's no ishkal in that. If someone has intolerance to caffeine, they should not take it. But just say it's wrong because some people say it can also alter your mind, right? It's in a cognitive enhancer. Yes, a halal one. That's why tea and coffee, no scholar we know. In fact, as we said before, our scholars, they drink it. Our ummah is known for that, right? Coffee and tea. So coming back to sugary drinks, soft drinks are permissible, even though a lot could harm you, in small amounts is permissible. So you drink what you're supposed to only drink for a healthy person because it's a principle. Some of the Hanabila they mentioned, some of the Hanbali scholars, ما يضر كثيره يحل يسيره. Whatever harms in large amounts, small amounts is permissible. It's like the opposite of the other hadith, right? This is a qaida they mentioned. Whatever harms you in large amounts, still small amounts is okay. And they mentioned an example, saffron, actually. So it's interesting, they connect that to the law topic. Why? Because you just want to drink 1 can or 2. You're not supposed to take all 12. That's your business. If you're doing after that, Allah will ask you. لا ضرر ولا ضرار. But what if somebody has an underlying health issue? Can they say, okay, I'm just doing 1 can? If they have diabetes, not allowed. Shaykh Uthaymeen actually explicitly mentions that. If someone has diabetes, for example, and sugar harms you, it's haram for you to actually enjoy it because it harms you. And the scholars actually, they don't shy away from that. If something harms you specifically, so for example, you have another particular allergy, for example, you cannot consume that food because it harms you, فَهُوَ haram for you. For you. Just like for caffeine, if you know, for example, you have a high caffeine tolerance, you can drink as many cups of coffee or tea, whatever you want. Someone else has lower, for him to his degree. It's very important. As Shaykh Uthaymeen said, for some people they drink many cups, doesn't harm, others a little bit, they can't sleep all night, so you have to judge based on the person. But this principle comes in handy. Why? No scholar ever made haram cola or soda. Some people are saying it has too much sugar, it's haram. It's not a proper fiqh. Right? This isn't, because now what is happening? You're making haram sugar, right? قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ. Who is making haram? Allah made halal. So this, you have to understand this principle. And some ulama mentions under the idea of masalih and mafasid. Something else, inshallah, we'll mention, maybe we'll finish with this one. The issue regarding foods like GMOs, GMO food, what's the ruling on that? And people ask this question about, we know this organic or non-GMO food, which is the best to consume, but what is the ruling on eating genetically modified foods? So some of the bahithin, they did research on this. For example, I think Dr. Khalid al-Muslih, when he wrote a research for the Hay'a Kibar Ulama, in one of their magazines discussing this issue, and his conclusion was, in the year 2012, that as far as first current records show, GMOs have no long-term side effects as far as we know. Yes, we have uncertainty that what will happen after significant amounts of time, but no conclusive evidence has shown that consuming genetically modified foods kills somebody or significantly impacts their health. So he said from that angle, we cannot make haram, Allah make halal. Along with that, we know genetically modified foods can actually improve some communities' food sources. As we know, the golden rice, for example, when it was introduced, it actually expanded food source for many poor countries. So there's maslahah. Right? Sometimes we forget, over here we have choice, other places they don't have. So from there he said, until it's proven there's actual harm to your health, proven, then we can't make haram Allah min halal. And that's why I believe most countries in the world, they permit this, but they also offer you option of not having that if you wish. So we just mentioned that in case somebody goes to the extreme, starts making haram wa Allah min halal. Is it mean that ulama saying eat genetic modified foods, don't eat organic? They're not saying that. They're just saying that you can make haram wa Allah min halal based on unclarity and not the proper principles. Because again, we cannot only look from our perspective. A fatwa is based on what? All the factors in there. Right? Haram is what? Again, has to come in Quran and Sunnah and also follow the principles we mentioned earlier. So that's just a benefit. We translated this fatwa actually some time ago. So if someone go online, they can find that. So inshallah, there's a few other things, but I think that's most of what I wanted to cover. Inshallah, next week we'll finish, we'll try to move away from our ingredients to two big issues. Really important, cross-contamination, this issue. And last one to do with restaurants, etiquette, and some issues regarding when you going to restaurants and you're going to eat food, what is the rules, the ulama etiquette? For example, can you eat in a place where there's alcohol? Do you have to ask for the halal certificate to eat at a place? All these kind of questions, inshallah, we'll try to cover them. So if we can do maybe one class or two classes, inshallah, we'll try to do that. And whatever else beyond that, inshallah, we'll try to, and if brothers have other topics and stuff, just you can let me know also. We'll try to quickly add them till we did. Allah Ta'ala a'lam wa a'lam, inshallah. Any questions, we'll take them. Bidhina Ta'ala. Yes. It's a good question. Is it permissible to sell dog food? They asked Shaykh Sulaymaan Ruhaili this question. And also, I believe, Sheikh Abdurrahman bin Nasir Barak also, and they both argue that there's two issues or more there. Number one, what is in the food, the food itself, and then, but the second one, they argue they were more focused on whose dog is it, because we know Muslims, we don't own dogs, so the non-Muslims own dogs. So can we make food for them? So what they concluded is better to avoid that, because even though non-Muslims could have dogs, in fact, for them it's halal and they don't deem it haram. Some scholars argue that they're not supposed to have them either, because it went to usuli issue. Are they underneath our Sharia laws or they're not? It means, are the non-Muslims supposed to adhere to Islamic law or they exempted? It's actually a usuli issue. This scholar is different. But coming back, they both discouraged it. There's some detail, he said it could be possibly allowed, but it could open the door to doubt. So they said avoid it is better. That's what their conclusion was. We'll double check again, but that's what I remember. Wallahu a'lam. Any other questions? Yes. That's a good question. MSG, what's the ruling on that? It goes back to the harm. Wallahu a'lam. There's, as far as I know, conflicting arguments or discussions about it. Some say there is no harm, some say there is harm. So for the most part, it's been avoided in the food industry, but some places still use it because they say it just has a bad rep. I've seen some articles talking about that. So, wallahu a'lam, maybe there's more research, maybe the brothers know better, but as far as I know, that it goes back to that discussion. If it's actually harmful, or is it just there's been an outbreak or certain harm that happened some time ago and it was connected negative to it. But for what I understood is that it doesn't have any harm, it just enhances the taste of the food, but wallahu a'lam, it should be looked into more. Maybe someone knows better than that. I don't know more than that. Wallahu a'lam. Yes?
Speaking of animal food, is there like excessiveness or extravagance concerning that? Like how people present excessiveness for animals, what is humans starving and so forth?
Yes, this is a big issue. Animal welfare, we know in Islam we call to protection and preservation of animals and their rights. But at the same time, the preservation and the dignity of humans are above and more than animals. And this is the Islamic paradigm. We believe that animals have rights, they're also protected, but then humans are the highest. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored human beings and made them sacred or sanctified. So with that, obviously, there is excessive in the Western world when it comes to animal rights activists who put their primacy on animal rights and they forget human rights. Or sometimes they'll say that we can only campaign, argue for one case. So why is it human rights are ignored and animal rights are prioritized? They say because animals don't have the ability to verbalize their rights, and etc., etc. So we say there is excess in that even the animal rights now, if you really deeply study it, you'll find it's very difficult, a deep topic, and very confused topic amongst people because it's not a black and white discussion. Animals have rights, but do they have duties? That's the question that the people, theorists have. The bottom line is that we have to have balance. We protect animal rights, we call for their upliftment, but we must put humans' rights. And some of our Shaykh, they criticize these movements for doing that. Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, one of his tapes, he said this is the problem. They're concerned with the animal rights or fines for animal cruelty to animals is much higher sometimes than what happens to humans and their concerns. So that's a taint on those people who are trying to advocate for a good cause, but they have come with the wrong methodology. So as Muslims, we always call it wasatiyya, balanced. That's the goal, balance, and not to be extreme. And we challenge those people to put in the right their priorities in the right places. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah, you had a question?
I'm not sure if this was mentioned, but I want to go back to vanilla extract. Does it take, the same ruling for, you said that vanilla extract has larger amounts of alcohol. Does it also take the same ruling where if you're not sure who made it, like for things like baked goods, cookies, whatever you find, if it's in there and you don't know the person that made it, does it take the same kind of ruling like as vinegar?
So that's a good point. We mentioned before the ruling on a vanilla extract and that it has significant amounts of alcohol, and that's different than if vanilla extract was put into baked goods and now you're buying the final product. So two different things. To buy it in and of itself, we said that the high amounts of ethanol, scholars said to avoid it because it's 35% or more. But when we're talking about now, if someone took some amounts and put it into ice cream, for example, or a cake, then it's halal to eat the cake and ice cream because there's no intoxication from that, and the amounts are so small, it's only the flavor or the scent that remains. So differentiate between what has been put into and baked and finished versus the actual ingredient buying it. So inshallah, yeah, so you don't have to worry about that. If you go and you buy vanilla ice cream, you don't have to be concerned, it's halal. The problem is, can you buy the regular extract, or should you go for the water-based or non-alcohol-based one? That's the issue, yeah. Inshallah, yes. And then after you go, yeah, inshallah.
Can you sell non-Zabih meat?
You mean like Ahl Kitab kind of meat? So we said that the issue of the selling and the buying of Ahl Kitab meat goes back to the ruling someone holds himself. So if someone holds it to be permissible based on what we discussed, the two different views there, then from once your first ruling, then the selling. But if you deem it haram, obviously you couldn't do that. And so obviously selling the dhabiha is the best. This is the best. But again, it goes back to that issue. And that's why you find sometimes this is one of the issues we have. What's someone's view on it? Wallahu a'lam, yeah. You had a question? So camel urine, we know in Islam, the Prophet ﷺ in Hadith Bukhari and Muslim mentioned that it has medicinal benefits. Camel urine for certain sicknesses. Now this point being made doesn't mean now someone just drinks camel urine without sickness. And some people misunderstood the hadith, they're just drinking it and they're not sick and then they get themselves sick. And they're supposed to cure you, not sicken you. But the problem is that camel urine is nothing wrong if someone has sickness. Some scholars, when they look at the hadith, they look to see what was the sickness, liver issue they had, whatever it may be. And it's not far-fetched. You look at many many prescription drugs today, or some prescription drugs, they actually use urine of animals. Like, I think horses, for example, there are some. So some people find it so strange. It's not strange if you actually research. And it actually does have some medicinal benefits. Yes, so in its proper usage, and for a particular sickness, yes, it's permissible to use prophetic medicine. Nabi Sallallahu mentioned it. And so, yes, someone can use it, but it has to be done for the correct sickness and with the correct prescription from a reliable doctor. That's the key. Always, Islamic medicine is very important. We have rules. It has to be the correct medicine and administered by the correct doctor. I mean, the person who has the knowledge for the correct sickness. Otherwise, it's not going to be effective. And the proof of that, they say the man who ate the honey, Nabi Sallallahu told him to eat the honey. First time didn't work. Second time, he ate 3 times. Nabi Sallallahu was showing him how to use it. The medicine worked, but it didn't work for him because he didn't take the proper prescription or the doses he needed, 3 of them. So it's important to have the correct medicine for the correct sickness under the correct supervision. Not you self-medicate. Because some people, they then say this is a prophetic medicine, then they get sick. So, and you have one more? It's a good point. Why is camel urine not najas? Who can help answer that? Why is the camel urine not najas? Good, because the meat is halal. It's an issue of fiqh, the tahara of a meat, or the permissibility of an animal. Once the animal is permissible to eat, its feces and dung, it's not najas. Right? So that's the principle, inshallah, we should know. And so therefore, that's halal and other things like that. Right? So inshallah, that's why and the proof of that is many, but we'll summarize that. And last question, yes?
Also, do some argue that it's not to be taken alone with camel urine?
Yes.
To be mixed with some milk?
Yes, exactly. And that's a benefit. The camel urine is not taken alone, it's mixed with the camel milk. And that's why when you go to the Arab and Bedouin to get it, they mix it for you. So this exactly shows you again, you have to go to people who know what it is. Otherwise, you're not going to get the effect. You might get, like I said, sick. Inshallah, if there are other questions, we'll end with this much. Next week, inshallah, we'll go from the issue of cross-contamination. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.